Caligula is quite an interesting franchise. A lot of its series creators come from the Persona series, and I think that brought a lot of attention to the original release. But with the original being stuck as a digital-only title in the West on the PlayStation Vita, and with the remake by NIS America put on Switch, PlayStation 4, and PC, that definitely helped to bolster its kind of reputation a little bit, but I feel like everyone has been very quiet about the sequel. And now, thanks to NIS America, I got a review code and have got to play through quite a lot of the game myself. I'm still working my way through it, but I hit the embargo date. I wanted to really talk about it because I just don't think a lot of people are talking about Caligula Effect 2, which I will be calling Caligula 2. So, a little bit of information. Caligula Effect 2 is releasing on PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch along with PC. All of the footage you are watching is from the PlayStation 4 version, recorded directly off my PlayStation 5. And let's just jump into it. What did I think of the game? So, Caligula 2 really took me by surprise. I had a very, almost like stubborn admiration for the first game and its remake Overdose. I think Caligula 1 is really good in terms of its premise, but really sloppy in its execution, and not just because it was clearly a budget RPG. Caligula 2 is really interesting, though. Caligula 2 always finds ways to almost play with my expectations in ways that are almost specifically to me. I thought, okay, this is a very similar premise of you're stuck in a digital world, there's virtual idols, and you're trying to escape it. That's literally the plot of the first game, but the first game's not really that popular, so they're not going to make it that connected. No, I'm extremely wrong. This game is very connected to the first game if you played it, but if you're a newcomer, which I'm sure many of you are, Caligula 2 is actually a better jumping on point than the first game ever was on any platform, which I'm extremely surprised to say about. So, obviously, Caligula 2 is not going to be winning any graphic presentation of the year awards. There's not a lot of style, but there's a lot of interesting presentation in its substance. I think the character models in the world look pretty bland, but I think the character design, I think when it uses its 2D art, while sparingly, is very nice. I think its UI is a really good step improvement of the first game, and I think it's always hard to kind of toe that middle line of it's minimal with lots of white without looking like placeholder text. And I think they did a really good job of it here, which is saying a lot because I'm just coming off of playing Monarch in the first couple hours of that, which I think does a very, very good job of being budget without looking budget. Caligula 2 definitely looks budget. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But while every janky walking animation or goofy run cycle may make you snicker, the stuff that matters actually looks really good and sounds really good. For starters, when you're in battle, which is quite often, all of the animations are very nice. You're watching these animations play out over and over and over because of the combat system, and I kept finding myself thinking, okay, in the first game, its combat animations were pretty stiff, and then in Caligula Effect Overdose, they added the special attack animations, which looked way better than every animation in the game, and I think Caligula 2 actually kind of put everything on par. So obviously your limits or your final break or your overdose attacks, the big wipe out all the enemy moves, those still look really good. There's still a lot of good attack animations there, but even your basic attack animations like swiping across twice and kicking with your leg, it looks smoother and it feels more dynamic than the first game ever did. I don't know if just it's a uneven amount of property or if it's just they were like, hey, we know our budget and we're going to focus on making the story tight and the gameplay fun and the music really, really catchy, which, by the way, I have to just say, the music in this game really stood out to me more than the first one, which was surprising because I liked a lot of the first one and it had a lot of interesting tones and themes, but they really, really dive deep harder on this one of like, hey, this is about idols. We're going to have multiple songs, multiple remixes of like, you're going to hear the same song over and over and over again, but it's about the different interpretations of here's the instrumental. Here is the version sung by this idol. Here's the version sung by this idol. And it weirdly never got old to me. I kept always getting excited finding new remixes or new tracks at all because it was like, hey, I haven't had a single track in this game that I thought, oh, it's kind of weak. So music-wise, they absolutely killed it with that presentation, and I could not be more happy about that. It's one of those things of like, when you're playing an RPG and it's dozens and dozens of hours long, the last thing you want is to just get a track that grades into your brain. Another thing, speaking in terms of presentation, I was really surprised about was, even though we're taking the same theme of the first game's story of you're in a school, you're escaping the school that's in a virtual world, is that it's not another high school RPG. You're not going to class. You're not having to worry about the same thing. Like, there's not, the first dungeon isn't you're running around your school, which is just such an easy trope, and I was so glad. Like, it's so funny to think back in retrospect of the first level in this game is, oh, you're running around subway corridors. I'm so glad it's subways. I would have taken subways over school halls any day, and I was so happy about that. And the other environments definitely didn't disappoint. The villains are also really nice. They're very interesting in not only their execution, but especially their design. I think everyone's designs look really interesting. I don't even know if this was on purpose. I think before you're transformed into your battle attire, you all look hilariously generic, but I think something about adding a weapon, the floral patterns, and your clothing kind of either expanding or ripping is just a really interesting and unique look for all of the characters you get to play as. Also, speaking of the characters, I don't know if it was just where I'm at in my head right now, of really wanting a good story character RPG, but for some reason, I related and connected to the cast of Caligula 2 way more than the first one. I thought everyone was very fleshed out without seeming super archetypey or just a dumb stereotype. And even when someone was a stereotypical character, like, oh, this character's an airhead, or this character's like a big train nerd, I thought it was so interesting of, like, they have their own unique spins, and it doesn't feel like I've heard this character a million times before. Even the background characters of, like, oh, here's the student council president, or here's the disciplinary committee council guy. They all have their own little interesting idiosyncrasies of, like, oh, he can never make decisions for himself, or, oh, she loves eating food, or she loves doing this in a way that, like, oh, this isn't your whole character, this is just, if I want to interact with you, these are some funny little quirks I can discover about you. And speaking of discovering things, one of the things I liked as a concept, but I think was really messy in the first game, was every character, for the most part, thankfully not actually every character, a ton of NPCs are real named characters. You have their age, you have their description, you can get side quests from them, you can become friends with them, and the idea of becoming friends with everyone in this giant world and linking up over your social network is interesting, but was really slow and really tedious in the first game, whereas they've really honed it down and tightened it of, like, okay, if you find a stranger, talk to them once, there you go. They're friends now, it's not a really slow and long, laborious process. Great job. Next step, though, there's a side quest for them. You need to do this side quest. It might be a chain links quest with other people, or it might just be, hey, bring me, like, a drink. It can be something small, medium, or even large. But then once that's done, there you go. You filled out my side quest. There's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of characters in this world. You don't need to be hung up on, oh my god, where are they? What are they doing? How can I find them? What do you need for this quest? Because when there's, like, literally almost triple digits people that you're working with in this game, you're not going to remember all their names, so the easier and more kind of fast you can make it, the better, because then when you do want to slow down, and you can look into those characters and learn about their history, it's like, oh, okay. Like, obviously, not every NPC is this super fleshed out real character, but it's nice to, like, look at these characters and go, oh, hey, okay, here's what you're like in the real world and not just the virtual world. Here's how this compares and contrasts to the way you're presenting yourself right now. It's really interesting and definitely makes me think a whole lot more than the first game. Story-wise as well, I love that it almost does this thing of, like, hey, we know we're the exact same premise as the first game's story, but we're going to build off that without needing to play the first one at all, which I really, really appreciate. I think the fact that your virtual AI is actually tangible and not just like a tiny fairy creature this time as opposed to the first one is really good. Having her there also as a part of battles and is part of the mechanics of, hey, if you want to have this extra mechanic of when you're in battle, it's all about time management. You have a time board of showing when your attack starts, when your animations hit, when they end, and when your cooldown's done. And it's all about managing your flow, your teammates' flow, when the enemies are going to attack, when counters are going to happen. The combat is really, really similar to the first game, but they just tighten it up a lot. It feels a lot faster. It feels very good in terms of, it never feels like you're overwhelmed. It's obviously turn-based, but there's still a lot of elements in terms of time management, which I really like. It was hard to make even a single 3 versus 1 battle boring. It was always one of those things that I really liked it because I could always kind of mess around with whatever my abilities were, depending on who my teammates were, and just really, really enjoyed the combat, and even enjoyed it a lot more in boss fights. Boss fights really surprised me in terms of their mechanics being a little bit different, never feeling overly hard. I just played on the normal difficulty, and I thought it was a really, really good balance of, okay, you're getting a challenge. You might die, but it's going to be really, really hard, and as long as you know what you're doing, like, it's not going to be a cheap death, which thankfully is one of, like, the biggest turnoffs for me, and I did not have it all in this game of, like, you're doing a fight, out of nowhere, super cheap death, go back to the save point. Thankfully, we totally avoided that. Honestly, though, it's really funny. I feel like I got all of my gripes out of the way in the beginning, and they're all gripes that, like, I totally understood, and understood about before really anything needed to happen. Like, the biggest gripes I have with this game are kind of upfront, assuming you know what this game is to begin with. So, like I said, this is not a full-price game. Its MSRP is $50. I think if you're a fan of this, or if this seems interesting to you, $50 for a physical, go get this. There's not going to be a million physical copies out there. Pick it up on Switch, pick it up on PlayStation 4, play it wherever you want. I think in terms of digital, it might be a little steep. It's definitely going to go on sale eventually. If you're a little apprehensive or have a million other games to play right now, once it hits that 40 mark, I think 40 is perfect. I think if you want to wait for like a $10 discount and you're not a physical collector and you're just like, oh, I want to keep an eye on this good RPG, this is a great budget RPG. Really, really good. I'm so glad NIS was able to publish this and get it out sooner than later. I've been honestly really jealous and trying to stay as media blind as I could from the Japanese release as possible. And it's just funny of like, it just opens up that whole conversation of just because a game is made on a budget, it doesn't mean that it has to make concessions of, oh, well, this is kind of boring, or, well, it's ugly, so it's a bad game. Of like, hey, there are tons of textures here that are basically ripped out of a PlayStation 2, but I don't need an Unreal Engine 4 game to look like next-gen, everyone's pores are all over the place, and it doesn't even need to be super hyper-stylized. Like, as long as you have interesting characters, a world, a story that actually I care about, along with interesting gameplay and world design, that's all I'm really here for. So, Caligula 2, thank you so much for being everything I needed from you and a little bit more, while still not breaking the bank. I don't know if we're going to get more of you, but I'm sure glad we at least had a better chance of kind of perfecting this formula as good as we could without really breaking the budget of the first game. So, if there's ever a Caligula 3, I'm all here for it. If you've not played Caligula 1, please check out 2. If you even remotely liked 1, definitely check out 2. 2 is just the better version of 1, which is so rare to see in a sequel, especially these days. So let me know what you think of Caligula 2. If you have any other questions I didn't cover, please let me know in the comments below. Or if you've even played the game for yourself, let me know what you think. I'm always excited to talk to more people about this series because it is still really, really niche at this point. So once again, thank you so much to NIS for giving me a review code and letting me review this game early. And if you enjoyed videos or review content like this, please consider subscribing. It really, really helps the channel out. Have a good rest of your day, everyone, and I'll see you later. Bye.